Mr. President, land is the alpha and omega of the politics, the economy, and indeed the history of Zimbabwe. Before and after independence, land has been the central issue defining the national program of this country. Why is land such an important and emotive issue?
Well, land is our creator. In other words, people like myself were born in the country. And we got attached to the land because there was the livelihood of the country people, the peasants, and indeed the livelihood of even those who were drifted into town. It was on land that we had our residences, our round huts, on land that we walked, land that we tilled for all that we ate, and on land that the grazing was for our cattle, goats, and sheep. That was the life. Land is crucial. Land is part of me, part of others, part of our people. You can't detach yourself from land.
Why the emphasis on land and why not other means of production?
Land comes first. Agriculture first. You must take care of the resource that supplies you with total life first. The others come after. Yes, in an economy which is developed beyond a subsistence level, then you must look at other areas. Look at that which is grown on land, produced on land, as it gets added value in the factories. Then you have the manufacturing sector. You must look also on land as a source of the minerals. So to us, that entity, that resource, once it ceased to be ours, created a sense of deprivation, deep sense of deprivation. And as we, looked back after colonialism had established itself, the greatest loss that was felt was that of land. And people talked of the land they had lost to the white man. Shall it ever come back? And when we organized our struggle, the first of the grievances was that of the loss of our land.
So it was the main
fight
issue
for land.
It was the main issue when you waged the struggle.
Yes.
And again, if I'm correct, it was the main issue on the agenda at Lancaster House.
It was the main issue. It became the main issue at Lancaster House because of the very essence, that value that it has always had.
Perhaps,
yes.
Mr. President, we should go back to the drawing board and find out exactly what were the Lancaster House agreements with regard to land and redistribution of land.
Lancaster House constitutional discussions, yes, centered on quite a number of areas of great importance to us. True, the land issue was crucial. The land issue was uppermost in our mind. But then the land had been lost to the whites. And we had to think of the best way of winning back the power that we had lost, the power over land. But when we looked at this land situation alone, it was now in the context of the loss of our sovereign rights. Sovereignty then was the first thing. Shall we have sovereignty? How shall we have it? We said we would have it through the barrel of the gun after trying all the non-military, non-violent methods. We had to negotiate, of course, the modality that would lead us to our recapturing, regaining our sovereignty. And that's what the Lancaster House Constitutional Conference was about. So sovereignty first, one man, one vote, as we called it at the time. Now one person, one vote. Yes. And one man, one vote would naturally yield majority for us. And that would mean then sovereign power coming back to us in that constitutional way, although the fight had been through a violent method. Yeah.
What did the talks say
and then,
about land?
Yes. Then, as we discussed that whole issue of sovereignty, how power shall unfold, what institutions we shall have, parliament, the executive, the judiciary, we then wanted to dwell on the issue of how the ownership by the whites of our land will now be ceded to us. In other words, how we were going to get our land back. And it was recognized by the British government that indeed the issue of land was fundamental, was crucial. But then the issue of how we would get it became the question. We said we wanted it back at the expense of the British, not at our own expense. In other words, we were not prepared to pay compensation for land that was seized from us without any purchase price being paid to our ancestors. So it was the obligation of the British to find money and compensate their kith and kin who were owners, legal owners of our land. We refused completely to carry that burden, and we were deadlocked on the matter. The Americans, the ambassador, and that was the Carter regime at the time, Carter administration. Their ambassador in London talked to Sonny Ramphal, who was the Secretary General of the Commonwealth. America was prepared to fund the land reform program. And if our funds and those of Britain were put together, you would have an adequate fund. But we shall also, together with the British, appeal to the rest of the world, and especially Europe, you see, to assist you.
So it ended on that note.
The Americans went further to say that what they wouldn't like to do or to be known is that we were giving you money for purposes of helping you with land reform, including compensation. We will say it's land for, it's money for land reform, resettlement and development, without the compensation aspect, because the American national would not want to hear that money has come out of his pocket and gone into the pocket of a British citizen in Zimbabwe. That would create problems for us.
So it was a question of the technical language.
Just how we shall camouflage it. But how you will use it is entirely your issue. But from our point of view, that's the way we shall do it. Okay, when that happened, and we talked to Lord Carrington, he said yes, he understands America was going to give money, so the issue is now resolved, but he still said you might also want to, one of the weekends, to go to Brussels and talk to the EEC Commission, as it still was. And Nkomo and I arranged to do that, and we flew on a Friday, one Friday evening, to meet members of the Commission. And they also pledged, assistance towards the land resettlement program. That is what happened at Lancaster, and this is how the deadlock was broken. Naturally, of course, nothing was written in detail about what had transpired, but we took for granted that everyone was a gentleman, and what they had said would be realized in practice, and that's how we proceeded. Fortunately for us now, Lord Carrington has, in the House of Lords about 2 months ago, confirmed that yes, there was the undertaking to assist, which Blair has not accepted all along.
Was then, after independence, money made available? Did the Thatcher and the Reagan government, subsequent to the Carter administration, make funds available to enable you to proceed with the land distribution program?
The first 2 or 3 years saw us receiving quite, I should say, significant flows of funds from the United States. I think the United States' own funding came first. The British funding was on what you might call a reluctant basis, hesitant basis. All of a sudden, the British wanted us to go about the business of funding, the program on a 50-50 basis. And they said they wouldn't produce their own 50 pounds unless we had produced our side of that funding first. In other words, it was 50-50.
You bring something to the table.
We must bring first. Yes. It's as if now we were playing cards and gambling. Yes. You see, put yours on the
yes, on
on the table, and I put mine.
And we say, that was not
no,
raised.
it had not been raised. But you see, this is how the British do it: sly and cunning, and undependable in the extreme. So we had to fight this. And it was only after 2 years that they now relented on it and said, okay, we will fund the process. But at the end of the day, we didn't get much more than about probably about 40 million pounds from the Americans. Well, unfortunately, Carter lost the election that followed a year or two afterwards, after Lancaster, and in came Reagan, and Reagan was a strict character, rigid, didn't know very much. In a sense, he was quite an ignorant president, one of the most ignorant presidents America has had, because each time he spoke to you, and I happened to have been invited by him, unless he had got the information on his cards in advance, and he could read the card and answer you. His people would say, oh no, he cannot answer that question, and so on and so forth. And he was playing cards, in discussing with you, and I've joked about it and saying, you don't want to discuss with a man who's playing cards all the time, you see. So he didn't know the situation. Carter did know. But Reagan also thought we were die-hard communists. And on that basis, he stopped the aid that Carter, had brought into being. His reasoning was that at the United Nations, we tended to support the Soviet Union and China more than we supported the United States. When Bush succeeded him, Bush had visited us here and we had handled him very well. We had become friends. He wrote a note to me to say, let bygones be bygones. And so let's start again, start afresh, start on a fresh slate. So we tried to start on a fresh slate, but no, there was very little that came back to us after we had lost it. And on the other hand, the British had stopped their aid. So we tried to negotiate with them. Negotiate with Thatcher, we didn't succeed. When later Thatcher was out and John Major came in, we started negotiations, and Major was understanding. He had been here attending CHOGM, and in 1995-96 thereabouts, he agreed to send a team here to look at the situation here and hear our views across, the gamut of our various opinions. And his six-man team wrote out a report which was very good, very favorable. And we expected that they, sooner or later, the British would respond favorably. But then there came elections in Britain, and Major lost, and in came Blair. And the problems that you see have come out of him.
With hindsight, Mr. President, what is your analysis? Do you think they were buying time?
No. Major meant well, but he didn't have the time in which to fulfill, his wish to assist. Blair was negative from the very beginning. He began by telling me when we, the only moment we met and discussed, and that was during CHOGM in Scotland, telling me that he had a team looking at the issue, and he would soon let us know what the position of his Labour government was. But he never came back to us. All we heard was, no, there is no responsibility, colonial responsibility anymore, that Britain should discharge. All that they owed us was done in the past and nothing more.
So when did the wheels exactly come off?
They came off, they started coming off then. We then tried to, educate them and to emphasize the issue and enlighten them in various ways, and remind them of the obligations that they had, especially of the promises and undertakings at Lancaster House. But no, they wouldn't listen to that. Claire Short said the only way they could assist our situation was if it fell under the poverty alleviation program that they were now, building up.
In fact, Mr. President, I would like to refer you to a letter that was written by the British International Development Minister, yes, Claire Short, yes, whom you have just mentioned. A letter written on the 5th of November 1997,
yes,
to your Minister of Agriculture and Land, the Honorable Kumbirai Kangai.
That's right.
In the letter, Ms. Short wrote, I should make it clear that we do not accept that Britain has a special responsibility to meet the costs of land purchase in Zimbabwe. We are a new government from diverse backgrounds without links to former colonial interests. My own origins are Irish, and as you know, we were colonized and not colonizer. It went on, and then concluding by saying, I am told there were discussions in 1989 and 1996 to explore the possibility of further assistance. However, that is all in the past, suggesting that the matter was closed. How was this received by your government?
Very badly. It was a negative response to an issue that was very, very, shall I say, a dynamo here. It's explosive in the sense that the issue of land has been the one grievance in our bosoms that we hoped Britain, working together with us and doing so positively, would help us, you know, have a remedy to. But the grievance went on. And of course, we said, when she wrote us to this effect, that, so this is the negative attitude. Fine. This is a government which knows no rules, doesn't accept the law of succession as it obtains in international law, because a successor government must obligations, as indeed it must enjoy the assets of its predecessor. And so they had apparently no rules, no principles. So we said, fine, if they're going to behave that way, we will also here ignore completely the issue of adhering to principles of compensation of the farmer. So we will take our land. They keep their money, we keep our land.
So take our land by force or whatever means.
Well, that's how we said we would proceed now. We would pay compensation only for improvements. Anything that one can call developmental on the farm, an irrigation scheme, dam, fencing, homestead, we'll pay compensation for, but not for the land itself, the market value of the land, no. And that is what we said we would do. We were then going to have a new constitution. And in that constitution, we wanted the issue of compensation, which had existed in the Lancaster House Constitution, to be amended. So it could read that compensation will only be paid, adequate compensation will only be paid upon adequate funds being made available by the former colonial power. When it was put to the country, the whites, almost all, rallied behind the opposition and opposed it, merely because of that compensation amendment regarding compensation. They didn't want it. And we began to wonder why they would refuse compensation, because they didn't want the land to go at all. So we read, as they rallied openly behind the opposition and was giving it funds, and were giving it funds, that they were not for us. They were for land remaining in their hands. And even before we sat here as the party or as government to put our program together of acquiring land now, the war veterans on their own, using their own association, started operating and going in onto farms without any promptitude from us. And we said, fine, good. They fought for freedom, and it was freedom with the land as the gain, the major gain. They wanted us to use our police. I said, no, we will not use our police at all. These are demonstrations.
But as government, wasn't there a way of dissuading the war veterans and pursue the legal route?
The British had never used the legal route to seize our land, you see. So we started being political, blatantly political. They had taken the land from us without using any legal rules at all. It was seizure by the settlers. The settlers acting on the strength of a charter given them by Queen Victoria. They got our land, occupied it by force. We are now going to take it by force. We did that, yes. And we were entitled to do it as a government. The land is ours. They had refused to provide money for compensation. The only course was for us to take our land back and say to them, fine, if your kith and kin want compensation, you give it to them. We can't give compensation to them because, in the first place, those of them who acquired the land from us didn't pay for it. That became now the issue. And Blair has tried to fight the issue from his side, now using Europe as allies and say, etc., etc. But we say the land is ours. Here we were born. Here our ancestors lie in graves. Here our progeny will find their existence. It is Zimbabwean soil, Zimbabwean land, and must come to us.
Thank you, Mr.
That was the
President.
reckoning.
Let's take a short break. We'll be back in a short while. Please don't go away. Thank you for joining us. We are having an interview with the President of Zimbabwe, His Excellency, President Robert Mugabe. Why have most African countries failed to advance from political power to complete economic emancipation?
Well, for a number of reasons. One, although you got your political power, you did not inherit with it the economic means. The people are poor, the people are illiterate. How do you get development to take effect in those circumstances? You then must open yourselves up to investment from outside. And investment from outside, whilst it has the benefit of adding to your resources, a new resource by way of capital, has also the disadvantage of control by foreigners. So that is that. In our own formerly colonized countries, ourselves, South Africa, Mozambique, Namibia, we have to grapple with control by settlers who may not look at the same at issues in the same way as you do. Their objective might just be self-aggrandizement. In other words, they want to enrich themselves the whole way through. The objectives that you have in regard to enlightenment, the raising of the literacy rate, and eradicating disease, and creating a social environment where people interact and therefore benefit by, that interaction, that these are not necessarily their objectives. And so altruism doesn't exist on their part. The leadership has got to cause empowerment of the people in those circumstances. And we are glad in South Africa there is that program of empowerment. Here we have it. They may call it indigenization, but it's empowerment nevertheless. And here we have said the resource that comes first in the process of empowerment is that of land. If the people have their land and they are assisted in having the means with which to till that land, the fertilizers, inputs like seed, etc., tillage, they can become rich or at least improve their condition of wealth by, in a matter of a year, a season. You grow today, you sell tomorrow after 3, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, and you have now some income. So you have to build, this process of enriching people by getting them to have incomes. And incomes in a country that is just got its independence. In my view, if it was like our country, with land as a resource, good rains, and hardworking people, that country would then emphasize agriculture first and foremost. But it depends, of course, on the situation and on what the natural resources that are yours may be. But in our own environment here, and indeed in most African environments, agriculture must come first.
Mr. President, I want to add another dimension to this whole subject of political independence and economic emancipation. By drawing parallels between Ghana after independence in the 60s and Zimbabwe today. When Nkrumah tried to set the economic emancipation of his people in motion through the integrated industrial project, the Volta River project, the colonial powers stopped him in his tracks. And eventually, his government was overthrown in a plot that was hatched by the CIA with the assistance of Britain and France. Are there lessons from the past to be learned?
Yes, sure.
Are there similarities?
There are similarities. There is always on the part of our former colonizers the perennial desire to retain control over us and to manipulate our economies in their own interests, to their own advantage. And this is what happened in Ghana, especially in the context of the bipolarity we had between, capitalism and socialism or communism, where it was feared that newly developing countries will tend to gravitate towards socialism or communism rather than create an environment of capitalism. In other words, rather than continue the former colonial environment in which capitalism can thrive. And I happen to have been teaching in Ghana then, 1958 to 60. And that was the height of Nkrumahism then. And Nkrumah was trying all this. And I happen to have seen what Nkrumah was trying to do. Yes, he tried his best, but he did not have a united people. If there is no unity in the country and the people are divided, the less progressive element in that scenario of division will tend to rely more on outsiders. And we have that situation here. You can see what's happening here. It's precisely the same as the same scenario as we found in Ghana.
I want to illustrate the point further, Mr. President, if you may indulge me. I want to refer to the American government documents which were declassified at the end of 1999, but recently made public The documents show that the American government started talking about Nkrumah's overthrow 2 full years before the actual event. And the strategy, as the State Department asserted, was, and I want to quote from the documents again, intensive efforts should be made through psychological warfare and other means to diminish support for Nkrumah within Ghana and nurture the conviction among the Ghanaian people that their country's welfare and independence necessitated his removal.
Sure.
And the other point was crack the back of Ghana's economy and make her weak. Now, I turn to Zimbabwe today.
Sure.
Are there any similarities?
Yes. Oh, yes. Quite an analogy that you have given us, and this is what they are trying to do, diminish support for the ruling party, the liberation movement, and crack the back of the economy, precisely what they are trying to do, except that now we are a little wiser, having seen the experiences other countries have gone through. But of course, they will always try, coup d'etats. In the end, it was more the disaffection of the army that won the day for them, and saw Nkrumah being overthrown. And you have to rely, therefore, on the most loyal of your people, your forces.
When is the curtain finally coming down on the land redistribution
It will never come down.
Right.
It is what has come will come down is the stage. Well, like in any drama, and you have the scenes, of course, and the acts. Act 1, yes, the curtain will fall. Act 2 is about development, but there will still be the elements from Act 1 that will persist. People, new people, few though in number now, wanting land. And of course, because we continue to beget children, and the new ones, the demand continues to grow. But it will not grow in that geometrical way, if you want. It's more arithmetical, if you want to put it in mathematical terms. And this is what you get. So we are now at a stage where most of the people have got the land, but we still have a substantial number of those who have not been resettled here and there. We have the A1 and A2. A1 aims at giving homes, residential places, with areas to farm, areas to graze, and areas for the home. That's A1. And under definite chiefs and definite traditional leaderships. A2 is about making money, land for making money, commercial land. So and this is the one which is not yet as complete as A1. And we will proceed with it, but the demand will not be as great as it was in the past. But the demand that we are going to face now is developmental. Inputs, how can we afford inputs? Make, people economically wealthy. Let them derive now wealth from the land that they have. This is now the issue, the development of the land in order to benefit the land user and indeed the landowner.
The criticism on the land issue that land is given only to your cronies and not to the landless majority?
And who believes that? Yes, who would believe that? How do I really give land to just my cronies when the majority of the people, you see, are in the country? We only know their identity, political identity, when we meet and when we have rallies. But they are a mixture of all tribes, religions, and various backgrounds, political persuasions, and so on and so forth. And you can't go and into the rural area to people under a chief and say only those of ZANU must be given land. Those who belong to the MDC or don't belong to any party, either of these parties, should not get any land. We do not have time for that. The chiefs had their own lists everywhere. Anyone who needed land gave his name or the name of his own son or daughter. And this is what happened. That's how we have given land. And if there are people who have been denied, yes, and members of the Welshman Mugabe has got a farm, and there are others too with farms. The schools we run, the education we give, do we discriminate? I ran a program, a 40-year program of students in order for sentimental reasons and for good reasons also, historical, to keep us in touch with 40-year, which has produced, quite a good many leaders for our country, and to keep in touch, yes, and the continent. So I ran a scholarship there. You have Changirai boy there, he is there. And
any benefits from this?
Yes, he benefits from the program. It's a government program. The scholarships are given by the government. And we just look at the results and then the recommendations that are made by the governors in the various provinces, and we give them that. No, this is just to try and demean the program and try to, demolish it. But of course, it's beyond the stage where demolition of it can take place. It's actually now well-rooted, well-grafted.
Let's look at the economy, Mr. President. Some say you have mismanaged the economy, and they talk about the chronic shortage of food, and the high inflation rate. What is your response to that?
Of course, I say that's nonsense, absolute nonsense. Yes, we are going through difficulties, and mainly because of two factors, two elements. One, the phenomenon of drought, and droughts, coming in succession. Well, first we had the cyclone Eileen, which devastated our country, part of our country. Then we had droughts 2 years in succession. Even last year we had a drought up to December. The rains started falling well in January. Then, of course, our country, the economy, relying more on agriculture. Our factories all are agricultural based by and large, and so if agriculture fails, then of course it undermines, that failure undermines also the manufacturing sector. Then of course the sanctions that have been imposed, although they say the sanctions that have been imposed on us are personal sanctions, the travel sanctions and so on. That's not telling the truth. The British have not wanted to fund the programs they were funding earlier on. The Americans have withdrawn their funding, and there has been an appeal to various of our donors by Britain, broad daylight, and it's against the international rules, but they have done it, gone to various countries in their European Union to say no funds should not be given to Zimbabwe to strengthen the regime of Mugabe, which is dictatorial, and so on. There has been this withdrawal of funds. But we have managed. The wonder is actually that we have managed to this day to be on our feet, and there won't come a day when we will really say, now we are gone, we have collapsed, we are dead people. Never. As long as we have our land, and as long as we are simple in our needs, we will survive. And we survived during the struggles. We are eating very little. In some cases, actually eating, fruits in the forests. War veterans. But we managed, and our people were herded into keeps. It was difficult times we had. The times we have now, difficult though they are not comparable to the times our people went through as the liberation struggle was being fought with sanctions on Smith. The situation is much better. If you look at what has happened over years through our educational system, we have empowered our people. And you have young people who have developed to the level where they are millionaires now in the financial sector, the economic sector. They have many rich people here, but it is the majority of the people at the bottom. And it continues to be the peasants who are having a raw deal at the moment. And the peasants will still continue, in spite of the hardships, to support the party which liberated them. We never depended on the sugar people in the urban areas, for our struggle. It was these people, hardy, who believed that the struggle had to do with their regaining their land, who supported us right through. And that's the difference between our struggle and your struggle. In respect of your struggle, it is the urban people who played a part, because of course after 300 years you are more highly industrialized than ourselves. But here, no, it's the minority are in the urban areas, the majority in rural areas, and these are the people we depend on. But for that matter, a Zimbabwean in Harare or Bulawayo or Gweru will never tell you that his home is in those places. No. He always points to his home being in Gutu, Buhera, Gwanda, etc. That is because we are not yet as industrialized as yourselves, as other countries. That will come later.
Of concern is the inflation rate rising up to 269%. I mean,
sure.
Why has the Reserve Bank allowed the situation to get out of hand? I mean, the Reserve Bank governor...
I must admit that we have in our situation economists and these highly educated experts on finance and so on who think a situation troubled as it is, must be handled or addressed in the same way as a normal situation. To them, no, there is no real hardship here that demands that they change their rules. So they stick to bookish rules and bookish norms of handling the economic situation. We are in a state of emergency. We have said it's actually a state of war. And in a state of war, you've got to use measures that address the situation, looking at the very vital points that need to be addressed. Well, we have allowed them to go about it that way, but we are going to overhaul the system soon.
Zimbabwe this week has seen the final push call being made by the opposition. Has that been effective?
I don't know what they meant by describing it as the final push. But the final push has failed totally. If it was meant to be a push at all, it has not been a push of the government meant to create a room for Tsvangirai to take over. On the contrary, it has been a push in reverse. So who has pushed who? That is the answer that we want the question to be answered. It was, of course, erroneous in the extreme to think that the opposition could come together, organize people illegally, and get them to push the government out. Of course, that was an illusion, complete illusion, and unless that they knew it was not going to be a push, but just a matter of doing something that would receive the attention of the G8. It was just some drama for the G8 that they wanted, but a drama in which the main characters have failed to impress anyone.
Hasn't this, though, provided an opportunity to see how the government could engage the opposition party and other stakeholders in the country meaningfully and find a way of resolving the problems that Zimbabwe is facing?
We are open. We have expressed ourselves as desirous, actually, of dialogue. But it must be meaningful dialogue. You can't dialogue on issues that are still pending in court and requiring the decision of the court. They have gone to court, and we have said, either you withdraw the case in court regarding the legitimacy of my government, legitimacy of myself, or you wait until the court has decided on the issues that you have placed before the judges. So you can't have it both ways. So we are saying dialogue, yes, but you dialogue about what? With people who do not recognize that you're legitimate.
So if court cases were withdrawn, then do you think dialogue would actually start?
Yeah, sure. We said that, yes, we'll start dialogue. We can talk to anybody. We can talk to the MDC anytime. We are not afraid to talk. Mind you, we have had a history of dialogue in this country. There was a time in 1980-83 when ZANU-ZAPU were in conflict with each other. But we were dialoguing all the time until in December 87 we had the unity accord between ZANU-PF, between ZANU and ZAPU, and now we have ZANU-PF, and we are united, which is very good. And we dialogue, yes. We dialogue with even the religious groups, and would want to assure them that, no, there is the need for us to keep the church and state together, working together. We dialogue with the traditional leaders. We dialogue with any other groups. The women, for example, the gender issues, we've been dialoguing with them, regardless of the parties to which they belong. And why should we not dialogue with Shanghai? But you see, they want to dialogue with Blair and the English, dialogue with the Americans, dialogue with outsiders against their own government. And do not look at the need for the Zimbabweans themselves to dialogue with each other in a realistic way in order to get a solution to their problem. If we need a new constitution, well, as indeed it was said before the year 2000 that a new constitution was necessary for the country, we dialogued. When we agreed to have a referendum, they rejected it, the draft constitution that was presented to the nation. But if they want a similar dialogue, we can have it. There is nothing wrong about it. But if dialoguing, of course, should not be between parties, one of which is holding, an axe, to put it in our African analogous terms. One holding an axe over you, or a spear towards you, or holding a gun, pointing a gun at you. No, it must be dialogue of persons who believe that they belong, they have that common belonging to the country, and therefore would want to see a solution evolve through dialogue that can satisfy all the parties. And we are open, yes, on that one, certainly, and we remain open. We have said so to our mediators, President Obasanjo and President Beki, and they have been helping us immensely on this subject. But of course, their appeal to the MDC not to resort to mass action, not to resort to violence, has not yielded fruit. But we ask them to continue to appeal to them. And it's sad when we are forced as government, you see, to have to use tear gas against our own youth who are being misled. But we have to do it in the interests of peace and security. But we don't want to make our people suffer. We suffered enough during colonial times, and during independence, we want our people to be free, express their free views, and feel that the country belongs to them, that they have a stake, like everybody else in the country.
Finally, Mr. President, next year you'll be turning 80.
Yes.
And what are your immediate future plans?
Yes, as I get younger and younger, and I also get the ambition to retire. I don't know when it will come, but I don't want to retire in a situation where people are disunited, where certain of our objectives will not have been achieved, and retire against the background of division. No, that's why I've said the succession issue should be discussed in a harmonious way, openly, and if it points the way forward, well and good. But if it's going to cause division, as it is tending to do at the moment, then one says no to it. But however, the choice is that of the people. I was chosen last year. I mean, elected last year, and it would be nonsensical for me, a year after being elected, to resign. The people will say, why put us to all this, much ado, and much ado about nothing, and there you're going, And of course, against the background of these attacks, these pressures from the British should let us free, refrain from exerting pressures, and the Americans with them do the same. But as long as there is that fight, I am for a fight. I'm getting younger, as I told you, and I still can punch.